Hello and welcome to Ticket Manager's All Access interview series, engaging leaders from across the sports marketing spectrum to identify and explore critical issues in the business of sports, entertainment, sponsorship, activation, ticketing, hospitality, and even more. I'm your host, Jim Andrews. Joining me on this episode is Ricardo Fort, the founder of Sport by Fort, his own consulting firm that is now just over a year old. And of course, previously the head of global sponsorship for both Coca-Cola and Visa for nearly a decade. Ricardo, welcome. It is an absolute pleasure to have you join us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to talk to you.
Can you just tell us briefly about Sport by Fort and what you're working on currently?
Sport by Fort is a firm that I founded a year ago when I decided to go solo after 25 years of experience working for corporations like Coca-Cola or Visa or Unilever. I thought it was time for me to do something different, and I decided to do what I love to do, which is work with sports marketing, but helping more brands, helping sports tech startups and other companies that are trying to figure out how to invest in sport. So today, my life is a combination of all these things. So with traditional sponsors, helping them think about their investments, negotiate contracts, also advising a series of sports tech startups, and also doing some work on investing in sports content firms and a little bit of a voluntary work in some other areas that I'm very passionate about.
I need to do a whole second episode with you, just hearing more details on some of those projects. But for now, I'll stick to what we had talked about earlier. And the first area that I'd like to talk about is evaluation and measurement. You worked for two companies in particular, Coke and Visa, that are very good at evaluating how their sponsorships are performing. But I would say that there's plenty of evidence that many other brands, sponsors don't do such a good job in that area. We see a lot of measurement activity around the top of the purchase funnel, but there's a perception, I think, that it's either too difficult or too expensive to isolate the impact of sponsorship on sales and other behavior related to purchasing kind of at the bottom of that funnel. I'd love to get your perspective on that, both from your experience and what you might be willing to advise other brands in terms of what they should be doing.
Yeah, so you're right, Jim. This is one of the areas that is most demanded by senior managers. So the CEOs, the CFOs, when they engage in conversations about sponsorships, usually they are not paying a lot of attention in the awareness that you build or the number of tickets that you get. What they really care about is why I should spend all this money, and usually is a lot of money, to do this instead of all the other things that I can do from an investment standpoint. Today, some of the sponsorships that large brands are dealing with, they are as expensive as acquiring a new company, as launching a business in a new country, or investing in equipment. So sponsorship managers are competing with all these other choices that management have in front of them. And unless you do a very good job in explaining why that investment in sponsorship is better than all the other alternatives, chances are the investments in sponsorships are going to go down over time. So I was lucky enough to work for companies that have an abundance of data. And that is a very good starting point for developing any models for measurement. It is not a must-have, but it certainly makes things easier if you have a lot of data available. So a history of sponsorships, a history of performance of different countries in different markets during periods of activation versus periods of non-activation, all of that help the brands to figure out what's the exact impact of the investments. But even if you don't have all this information, it's possible to develop models that with a certain level of certainty gives an indication of the potential impact of the sponsorships. What I see today, even with large brands, is that they are very focused, as you mentioned, on the top of the pyramid. So when you see reporting from after events, you see a lot of these brands talking about being the most remembered brand, the most associated brand with the event. When the reality is all of that, these are all vanity measures. So sponsorship managers can brag in the sponsorship press about being the most associated, but the reality is that it's irrelevant. What I encourage people to try to get to is, because of that sponsorship, the attribution of this sponsorship to the business results were X. And I've seen examples. I developed models for Visa and for Coke where we got to a point where we could say, by country, by volume of sales, by revenue, by profit, all of that was a result of that specific sponsorship. And that gave a lot of confidence for senior management to make decisions, or for me to recommend not doing something. So that's a little bit of the background on when to do it, how to do it, and the value of doing it.
And do you think that I sometimes I hear the argument, well, of course, if you're Visa or Coke and the spending is in the hundreds of millions of dollars for major sponsorships, it's worth the investment in the modeling. But if I'm a company that's maybe spending $10 million or so, that's my entire annual budget, is it still cost effective to do that kind of modeling? My impression is that the cost to do those kinds of things has certainly come down thanks to technology in recent years. But I'd love to hear your insight on that as well.
Any budget is important. So if you invest 100, 10, or 1, you can still adapt your own way of measuring, your own model to your reality. And I don't think the level of investment is an excuse to do it one way or the other. The thing that prevents sponsorship people to spend time and energy in doing this is, there are a few things. So it is very hard. So it's not an area of comfort for most people that grow up working in sponsorships. Activation and promotion and event management is more fun. It's easier. It's more natural to do than sitting down with, data science and measurement companies to think about that. But I think it's as necessary, if not more necessary than ever to do it. So I encourage, the people that are listening to us, don't get distracted by your investment level. Because even a okay model is better than no model at all. So if you want to leave a legacy, of your at your job when you move to the next big one, measurement is probably one of the most important things you can do.
I think you mentioned in our earlier conversation that we had, there's an expense associated with the measurement. It's not going to be as expensive as a bad sponsorship, as a sponsorship that's not performing, correct?
That's perfect. Yes, one bad sponsorship costs more than 100 models. Is the same old story of developing a bad TV ad and then spending $1 gazillion airing it. So right. You're just paying attention to the wrong things.
Let's shift away from measurement to another big topic area for sponsors, particularly recently. That's been a lot of discussion around the pressure that's been put on sponsors of events that are being held in, let's say, controversial places or are connected to people or governments who are considered bad actors regarding human rights, corruption, all of those kinds of things. That is something that in your previous roles, you had to deal with those kinds of situations. So I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of the internal process for deciding how, as a brand, to respond when it's activists or consumers who are raising these legitimate issues.
I had discussions in my previous jobs with the people that were in charge of human rights. Now, every big company has a human rights department, and they deal with labor issues. They deal with challenges like countries that don't respect human rights. So, and they interact with the NGO community that is dedicated to combat human rights abuse. So usually these people will come to you and say, "Hey, we know we have this event coming in Russia. I don't think we should do anything about it. We should be quiet. We should not promote it. And my feedback to these people was always, our company chose to do business in all these countries. Our company does business in China, in Russia, in Saudi. So if we have a problem with these countries, we should not do business there. So if we chose to do business there, we shouldn't have a problem in promoting an event that is happening there. So that there is no judgment of merit of the country or what I think personally about this company. The organization that I'm working for decided that they are going to deal with that government, whatever they do. And in this case, you just have to go ahead and promote the event. So my conversation, I always shut down this kind of approach because I think it's hypocritical. It's inconsistent with the behaviors of the company. So assuming that we are going to move forward, that we are going to promote all these events, there are things that you can do to prepare yourself to do it better, reduce the risk that is inherited to all of these events, and things that you can or cannot do. So when the event is happening in Russia and you are advertising and you're using a map of the world to say we are promoting in all these countries, you have to think about what you're going to do with regions that were invaded by Russia. Or if you're doing China, you have to think about how you present Tibet, right? So because that's a small thing that can become a big problem. You are always surprised by things that are difficult to predict. So you have to have a team in place dedicated to crisis management with a focus on that specific event. So before every event, there is a standing group that meets regularly to review the challenges and the potential issues that the event is going to bring to the company. And you have specialists from the sports marketing team, the government relations, public affairs, and in the host country. So all these people, they talk often, trying to mitigate problems, trying to engage proactively with NGOs, and trying to navigate this storm that usually hits all the sponsors. The idea of every sponsor is to make sure that you take maximum benefit from this event without putting the company in a position that can be harmful for its reputation. And with a little bit of care, you are able to do this. It's very rare that you have to make decisions that I'm going to stop the activation here. I'm not going to do X, Y, or Z because that's too risky for us. But this standing group is at the core of all the projects.
It's a little bit unfair, the spotlight that sponsors are under in those situations, because as you point out, there are plenty of corporations, multinational corporations, that have chosen to do business in all of those countries. Yet it's the sponsors of the Olympic Games or World Cup that get kind of called on the carpet, if you will. But to that point, just as a follow-up, the reason that happens, why the sponsors are kind of the focus of that attention, is because there's an assumption that the sponsors can really use their influence with the governing bodies to affect change. So I'd like to hear from you, just what is the reality there? How much weight do sponsors carry with those organizations?
Limited on a good day, none most of the time. The sponsors are probably the most visible constituent of every event, because they are there promoting, they're investing in media, they're doing promotions, and they're bringing people to the event. So it's normal that most people in society would believe that they play a disproportional role in terms of influence of what happens at every event. But the reality is that they don't. And to go one step further, even the commercial teams of the rights holders, they have very little involvement with decisions of hosting and decisions of how to handle hosts, because the elections, the selection of all these host countries, it happens usually in the case of the IOC by the IOC members voting. In the case of FIFA, It used to be the FIFA board and then became the FIFA Congress. So they are the ones that selecting the countries. And this is a political process more than a business process or a process that follows any logic, right? So when you think about Michel Platini being influenced by the former French president Sarkozy, asking him to vote for Qatar because Qatar was an important business partner for France. This is an influence that is impossible to predict. This is an influence that even the rest of the board members at FIFA, there's nothing they can do about it. So sponsors are so detached from that they can only live with the results. What sponsors hope for is that over time, you're going to have a group of hosts that are beneficial for business, and I think that in long relationships, that's the case. So if you think about the longevity of some of these sponsorships from Visa, for Coca-Cola, for Procter & Gamble, for Omega, I mean, they've been long enough associated with the Olympics for example, to live through great hosts and bad hosts. So as long as the average is positive, that's okay. We shouldn't get very much attached to one specific host and say, oh, the Winter Olympics in China was a horrible decision. Yeah, it was a bad decision. Looking at the big scheme of things, you have to take into account they competed against Almaty, which would be an even worse decision. So
exactly.
If you put yourself in the position of a IOC member, they did it right to choose China. And then, of course, when you look towards the future, you're gonna have fantastic hosts. You have Paris, you have Milano Cortina, and then you have LA, and then eventually have Brisbane. So you have fantastic hosts coming up, which makes every sponsor very happy. So I guess you have to take a step back and look from a long-term perspective if the hosts are good or not. But sponsors have zero influence in this decision, and they just have to deal with the cards that they are dealt with.
Just as a follow-up to that, because it is kind of that cycle is coming around, as you mentioned, to locations that are much less difficult in terms of being in Western Europe, North America, Australia, and you see that as a real opportunity for sponsors, and in particular in certain areas. Can you talk a little bit about what you see there?
It's going to be a fantastic decade for Olympic sponsors, for top sponsors, for domestic sponsors. So every brand that has the opportunity to be associated with the Olympic movement in the next 10 years is going to benefit a lot from that. Not only from the absence of big challenges like we had in China or in Russia, but because of the commercial opportunity that these games are going to offer. So you're going to have the next two games in the heart of Western Europe, which is going to be fantastic, not only for France or Italy, but for every country in Europe, that the proximity, time zones, and for mobility, for coming to the games. This is going to be great for Europe. The attractiveness of European games to the American audience, to the Latin American audience, even to the Asian audience, it's enormous. So it's going to be great to be part of it. And then when it comes to LA, we saw what the United States did when it hosted last in 1984. It transformed the games, basically creating the idea of global sponsorships after that. And I think we have high expectations of the LA 2028 games. They already have great partners, domestic partners. All the tops are excited to be part of it. So it would be great for every brand that is associated because of the business that North America or Europe can generate for any global operation. So, lucky all these brands that have the chance to be around the Olympics.
For someone who's had such a long career in sponsorship and on the brand side, I'd love to hear your perspective, Ricardo, on whether or not there's a gap between what properties are delivering or how they're kind of communicating with sponsors in the sales process and then in the execution process. Is there anything that you see that the rights holders and properties could be doing to become even better partners for sponsors?
Yeah, there are always things that can be improved from, I guess, from both sides. And it's impossible to give you an answer in generic terms because every rights holder is different.
Mhm.
But there are things, and I'm privileged because I have worked with so many. So there are things that I think every rights holder can learn from the others. And I had a chance to see a lot of them operating. So I'll give you a few examples. First of all, no matter who they are, there is one behavior for during negotiations, and there is one behavior for everyday management, account management. So I'll forget the negotiation for a second because that's a very specific thing. But on an ongoing basis, there are things that I'm a big fan. If you think about the NFL, for example, so in the United States, the NFL is probably in my experience, the most commercially flexible rights holders that there is. So they are very smart and connected with the needs of the partners. So they are capable to make decisions and be flexible to benefit partners to do things that they see as value for them and for the partner. So when you compare NFL, American football, with soccer, global football, and the kind of access that you have to the field of play, for example, and with the NFL, you can, if you tell them, listen, I have 100 clients that I need to bring to the field, half an hour before the Super Bowl, they will figure out a way to make it happen.
Yeah.
If you try to do this at a Champions League or at the World Cup, it's really hard, not to say it's impossible, because the culture of the NFL is let's figure out a way to make things happen. So I think in the category of being commercially savvy, NFL is outstanding. When it comes to, I'll say, social issues, helping you talk about social issues, NBA is always ahead of the curve. They are always connected with the community, what they are thinking, the movements in culture. So they are always open to have these conversations and partner with brands to help them drive the cause that they think is important for the brands and for them. Mm-hmm. When it comes to communication with the partners, for me, the benchmark is the work that McLaren does in Formula One. McLaren is exceptional in engaging with the partners. They have, maybe 40 plus partners. Zach Brown, their CEO, or their commercial team, their marketing team, Claire, their CMO. So they are constantly talking to the partners. They are sending video messages. They are sending communication. You're never surprised by anything that is happening with McLaren because you are not aware, because they didn't tell you. So they are proactively, they're all the time talking to you. So you feel like what's going on. You feel like you can speak about McLaren within your organization credibly because you are informed. So a lot of good practices there. The IOC, I think they do a very good job in connecting the partners. They have often they bring the partners together. They foster this communication. They want to make sure that the top community knows each other and help each other when possible. So I was with Visa, I was doing projects with Coke. We have engaged with other companies too. So trying to work with Airbnb, for example. So IOC is very good at that. And I think that this is just a little this is some top of mind example. I mean, every organization has its own good and areas of development.
Sure. And I think one of the interesting things about all of those examples is none of those you would characterize as being something terribly difficult. You're not asking these types of organizations to, completely tear up the contract every year and start over and completely new assets. No, you're asking them to do basic things like keep the lines of communication open, have some flexibility around, requests to get on the field, to, bring sponsors together at a summit or whatever it is, make those connections. I mean, those are not necessarily big asks, I don't think. So that's great. I guess the last could definitely spend another hour asking you all the questions I'd like to, but I'll manage it with just one, and that is you've had a career in sponsorship that is the envy of many people. Getting to run some great programs, and now being a consultant. But in general, we often hear that specializing in sports marketing and sponsorship is not necessarily a great path to obtaining senior leadership positions, particularly in corporations. How do you see that, and what advice would you offer to people who are in the earlier stages of their careers?
There is some truth to that, because and this is not exclusive to the career in sponsorships, because whenever you choose a career of a specialist, you are going to limit your growth potential within an organization, because organizations are designed to promote generalists.
Right.
So the CMO of the company will be someone that has worked in operations, sales, marketing, eventually technical product development. So we will have a career which is more diverse than a specialist. And most companies, I'm thinking with my own experience, large companies which are not in the business of sports, they have other needs, and they just use sports to reach whatever business objective they have. So if you are a specialist in taxes, in sponsorships, in formulation of products, you have a value for the company that is what you do, and it's unlikely that you're going to be the CEO of the company. So if your ambition is to become the CEO of the company, find a career which is more diverse and go work with, be a marketer, which is how I started. Just work in finance and operations, and you name it. Right. For some people, and I am of this opinion, and I have this profile. I opted at some point in my career, I opted for doing something that I liked, and I thought I was good, and I thought I was competent, and I would have fun doing this. So it is definitely a choice that you have to make at some point in your career, between I want to go very far doing something that I'm not very passionate about, mm-hmm. or I'm going to go to a certain point which can be great, can be very rewarding financially, in terms of experience, but it is anchored in things that I care and I like to do. So the option is very personal. At some point in my career, I thought that working in general marketing would lead me to become a CMO, would lead me to become a CEO, and I realized after some time doing this that the only part of my job that I liked was the sports. So I was wasting my time. So it was very easy for me, because I had the conviction that I like to do this. I'm good at doing this, and I can live with the consequences of having a career of a specialist. But my advice to young professionals that are starting their career is, learn other things. If you cannot claim to be a sports marketer if you don't understand marketing.
Right.
Sports marketing is a subset of marketing. So you have to understand communication, how to position a product, how to sell a product, how to develop promotions for a product, how to use the communication tools that are available today. And then eventually you migrate into sports if this is what you want to do. And when you make this choice, then you have another 10 different things that you can do. You can work for an agency, you can be a rights holder, you can be a sponsor, you can be athlete manager. So there's so many things you can do. And in the first 10 years of your career, try to do as many as you can, because eventually you will find something that check all the boxes for you, that you like, that you're good, that you have opportunity. And then, this may become a career. But, careers are long. I mean, you're going to work, 20, 25, 30 years of your life. It's not a big deal if you get it wrong for the first 10 years. Eventually things will work out if you have the conviction of what you want to do. So I'll try to convince people not to put too much pressure on themselves and try to make decisions at 23 of what they're going to do for the rest of their lives, because that makes no sense.
I think that's among the best advice I've heard for young people in our business. And I really appreciate it. And obviously following your own advice has worked out pretty well for you, I would say. So Ricardo, I can't, again, thank you enough for taking time today. And maybe we'll get a chance to do it again. Because like I said, there's certainly so many fascinating things about our business that you're involved in. I'd love to hear more about. But thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you today.
All right. And thank all of you on behalf of everyone at Ticket Manager. Thank you for watching and listening. And please join us again for the next episode in the All Access interview series.